Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture at Brown University and national co-coordinator for the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. And this is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Patrícia Campos Mello. Patrícia is a renowned journalist who works at the Folha de São Paulo, which is the Brazilian equivalent of the New York Times. She has a long and rich career that has taken her all over the world, from Baghdad and Kabul to New York and Washington, D.C. She's the author of 3 books. Her most recent, A Máquina do Ódio, Notas de Repórter sobre Fake News e Violência Digital, or The Hate Machine, Notes of a Reporter About Fake News and Digital Violence, details how Bolsonaro used fake news to get elected. So let's go to the interview. Patrícia, it's really great to have you today with us on Brazil Unfiltered. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, Professor. Thank you for having me.
So, Patrícia, in 2018, you published a series of articles detailing a possible illegal social media and strategy that Bolsonaro was using to influence the presidential elections. This was largely accomplished by spreading fake news about the PT candidate Fernando Haddad. Can you explain to our audience how this scheme worked?
Yes, sure. Well, Brazil is the second largest market for WhatsApp. In Brazil, pretty much everyone has WhatsApp. It's like synonymous with the internet. So what happens is that many, or actually most of Brazilians, get their information, including political information, from WhatsApp. And we were noticing that there was a lot of disinformation going on, mainly in the pro-Bolsonaro groups, because they were the Bolsonaro campaign. And actually, before the 2018 campaign, the Bolsonaros were forming several WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, like they were really investing in the social media marketing. And we noticed there was a large circulation of this information, mainly against PT and then candidate Fernando Haddad. And what we found out is that businessmen were paying for mass messaging through WhatsApp. It's basically you hire marketing agencies who do, they have softwares that emulate WhatsApp, and they send like millions of messages in thousands, hundreds of thousands of groups of disinformation and propaganda. This was illegal for 2 reasons. At that time, mass messaging through WhatsApp was not illegal, but what was illegal is negative campaigning through the internet. And also, it was basically a way to do undeclared expenses, like contributions that were not declared to the electoral authorities, because these were businessmen buying on behalf of the Bolsonaro campaign. I mean, we don't know for sure if the Bolsonaro campaign knew about it, but what we did know is that you had all these businessmen buying this mass messaging packages to benefit the campaign. So this is basically, and after that, we found out that they were also buying private information from voters, like anything you can imagine, gender, income level, ideological leanings, geographic, like address and all that. And so that you can micro-target the political messaging in a more efficient way. So you could, focus on, let's say, pro-gun rights groups, or more environmentally concerned people. You could just customize it, tailor-made. And this is also illegal because you're selling other people's private information.
So to what extent did this influence the outcome of the 2018 elections, do you think?
That's the $1 billion question. Disinformation researchers, we don't know for sure if this information is able to, make someone vote for someone or sway a vote. What we do know is that it sort of makes people more entrenched in their opinions, and it benefits extremist candidates, because people, the more disinformation you get more you believe more in your own beliefs, right? In everything that you want to endorse. So people get more and more ideologically extreme. So it makes, for instance, in a country like the US, where voting is not mandatory, it's important to mobilize voters and to get them to vote. And in Brazil, even though it's not mandatory, it's important, like people are not very politically engaged, and this makes people very engaged. And mainly what research shows is that not the moderate candidates benefit from this, just like the extreme, more extremist candidates.
It's very interesting because this is an anecdotal experience I had, but one of my friends, a gay man, got his BA in physics from the University of São Paulo, started passing on messages to me that he was receiving from his family, and he went really off on the right end. He was a very open, progressive person, and by the end of 18, I had to say, don't email me and don't WhatsApp me anymore because you're repeating all the fake news that the Bolsonaro camp was circulating. So if we don't have really concrete knowledge of the effect of this WhatsApp fake news circulation, do we have any way of getting a sense of whether this affected or could affect the 2022 elections?
We can have, well, one of the things that is important is that if you're just sending random messages with fake news to random groups, it's probably not very effective. But what is effective is if you're sending in a group and the people who are there who already want to believe in what they're receiving because they are, predisposed to do that, they're going to send the messages they're going to forward it to their families, to their wives, to their husbands, to their brothers, to their friends. So that comes with credibility. It's an added credibility. So for instance, I can give you the example of COVID-19. There was a study in August last year that showed that among 80 countries, Brazil was the only country where you still had a big circulation of disinformation involving hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. These are medications that do not work against COVID. So not even in France, where you had that doctor that said that he had those studies that were discredited afterwards, but not even there. Brazil was the only place. And then the studies that these people are saying said, because people like the president is pushing this, you have authorities pushing this. So you have people, and then you could verify this in reality that the sales of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine were like skyrocketing. So you can't say for sure if someone voted for someone, but we know in a very concrete way from the COVID-19 pandemic experience that there is an effect. People are influenced by this.
Right. It seems to me also that the Workers' Party and the Haddad campaign was somewhat caught off guard because they were trying in this 18 elections to do campaigns like they had been done before that, rallies, mobilizing people, whereas there was this underground circulation of ideas and campaigning that I think the Workers' Party was somewhat unaware of in the elections.
Yeah, I don't think they were, aware or focused on the importance of social media and internet for today's electoral campaigns. It's much more effective you can target it much better, right? Like to a more specific audience. So in 2018, you had two things that were very important. One of the things is when people say, traditional media doesn't matter anymore in elections, and we have the electoral free time on TV for the candidates. This is something in the Brazilian elections that each candidate, depending on the size or how many legislators the party has, you have a specific amount of time, free time on TV and radio and that kind of stuff. And Bolsonaro at that time, he was running in a tiny party, so he had very little time. So people said, well, this proves he won the election, even though, for instance, Alckmin, who was the PSDB candidate, had all this like minutes and minutes on TV. But there's one thing. In the middle of the campaign, there was an assassination attempt against Bolsonaro. He was stabbed. With that, he got hours and hours of primetime TV time every single night. right? So, and this is not the electoral period where people, usually they just turn off the TV because it's boring. It's like electoral propaganda. No, it's like primetime TV, news shows. So this is one thing. And the other thing is, PT did not realize how effective and how important the whole internet marketing thing was. It's not like Bolsonaro woke up in 2018 and said, whoa, I think I need WhatsApp groups. I think I need Facebook influencers. No, they were investing in that for years. So they were really, really ahead of PT in that sense. And in that sense, one of the things people usually discuss is like, why are extreme right-wing parties or candidates so much more, effective when they're using these internet tools? One thing that we can point out is Guilherme Boulos' campaign for mayor in São Paulo last year.
For our listeners, Guilherme Boulos is a left-wing candidate from the Party of Socialism and Liberty.
Exactly. It was an amazingly effective campaign based on social media. Mm-hmm. So I think these other progressive candidates they're just realizing that this is important and it's a very specific language, and it reaches a lot of people. And this becomes more and more important because these candidates that were elected, helped by social media campaigns, they are managing to discredit traditional media in a way. Mm-hmm. So some of these people, you can no longer reach them with traditional media because they think, newspapers are communist or TV. So you kind of need these different languages.
Right. So is anything changed in the Brazilian election law since 2018 to kind of fix the problems?
Yes. They banned, finally, in 2019, with a resolution from the Superior Electoral Court, it was banned, the mass messaging through WhatsApp. And WhatsApp itself, it became a public relations nightmare for them. So they basically started suing the marketing agencies that were doing this, selling those services. And they also adopted, after the Brazilian 2018 election and a wave of lynchings in India, also in 2018, they changed a few of they call them like friction mechanisms. It makes more difficult for a message to go viral. Mm-hmm. So it does not solve the problem, but at least they're doing something about it. Mm-hmm. But then right now you have a second problem, which is Telegram. Telegram is the messaging app where like all the right-wing politicians are going because they say, we need the freedom of speech and there's no regulation, there's no anything. So there's a lot of migration of Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro himself, every time he's on Twitter saying, you should follow me on Telegram, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of people that migrated to Telegram because of that. And because WhatsApp was not working, they had like a blackout thing. And Telegram is just like, they don't respond to anyone, right? They don't even have a legal representative in Brazil. They've been subpoenaed and they don't even bother to answer. So this is going to be a challenge.
So, Patrícia, during the lead up to the 2018 presidential elections, you were the target of fake news yourself. Can you tell us what happened?
Yes.
As painful as that might be?
No, it's okay. It's just like, I think the worst part is that we're journalists, right? We're not used to being news. So this was all awful. Right after I published the first story of the WhatsApp stories, they started with a massive campaign to basically character assassination campaign, saying that I was communist, I was a voter, I was supporting PT, and therefore people could not trust my stories. And then they had like fake pictures of me embracing Fernando Haddad, the PT candidate then, like the lady was not me. It's just bizarre how these things go viral. I always remember there was a lady that lived in the building next to mine that every time I would walk, it's like the doorman outside and two buildings, right? So every time I would go to the door, she would open the window from the second floor and yell, "You communist bitch." Wow. And I'm thinking, this is a person who believes this stuff she's getting by WhatsApp or on Facebook. right? So it's just, and then, 2 years, ever since then, it's been hard on, all of us journalists in Brazil and everywhere, I guess. We've been targeted a lot. And 2 years after that, there was a second wave, and this was more a misogynistic wave of disinformation, because the president himself, his son, and some other people basically said everywhere, including live TV, that I got exclusive information because I offered sex in exchange.
It's just horrendous. It's really horrible. I was in Copacabana with Jean Willis in 2018 for the Gay Pride Parade. We were walking down the street, and a woman who looked like she was a grandmother, she had two what seemed to be young granddaughters, started yelling at him in a way that I couldn't believe, with foul language. I'm thinking, how is this woman doing this in front of her possible grandchildren in such a violent way? Brazil has really become polarized in that regard. You mentioned that journalists are feeling threatened. What's that all about? Tell me more about what the journalists are experiencing.
Well, the president himself and the government officials, they stimulate people to basically attack journalists. So we had one episode last year that a photographer for one of the newspapers, Estado, he was covering one of the pro-Bolsonaro protests, and he was literally punched. Chauvin. He was like, people were really aggressive. And everywhere when we're covering those protests, they see the press as the enemy and as communist, which is actually very funny, because Brazil never had a communism, so it's just like, it's a fantasy that people actually believe in that. So for us, there's lots of hostility. Big newspapers and TVs, they no longer send their reporters to cover the impromptu press conferences that Bolsonaro does in front of the Alvorada Palace where he lives. Where he lives, yes. Because it became too dangerous.
Wow.
So they just didn't send, we don't go anymore, right? So, it changed. It's not like governments or previous governments, they like journalists. It's always, a tense relationship, but this is way beyond. Like, Bolsonaro told a reporter that he felt like punching his mouth. So it's just, and you get like, when that misogynistic attack started, like I got millions of messages of people saying that I should be raped. They did, porn videos with my face, montages, memes.
Did the government do anything? Did you report it to the government in some way, or see if there was any possible support from Justice Department or?
We reported it to the police. We did a police report. Nothing happened. And then afterwards, I am suing the president. We won, and he's appealing, and his son, and everybody who said that, not everybody, 5 public figures who said that, because it's a lie. And, we have all the evidence proving that it's a lie. But the government itself, no, they don't do anything.
Yeah. Listen, in 2020, early 2020, for a couple of weeks, it looked like the Bolsonaro Justice Department was going to prosecute Glenn Greenwald, the American journalist living in Brazil, who alleging he was part of a criminal organization because he was involved in publishing documents that were released by hackers who exposed a collusion between former federal judge and now presidential candidate Sergio Moro, who was the lead prosecutor against Lula. In the end, Glenn wasn't charged, but it did show what the government was thinking. What was your reaction during this time, and what was the reaction of your colleagues to this event?
It was sort of an example of what was coming. This was the first thing when they tried to criminalize a journalist, Glenn Greenwald, for, he was just publishing. He was not, hacking anyone, right? He was just publishing as any other journalist, like Watergate or Pentagon Papers, like someone was leaking and, journalists go there and check and publish. This is simply what he was doing. So we in the media, we got really scared because it sort of showed us, okay, so this is this is how it's going to be. And after that, you had the justice minister prosecuting journalists using the national security law or simply criticizing the president. I mean, just regular freedom of expression, opinion, criticism. And they have tried. So far, the Supreme Court has been working as the last remaining of the checks and balances now that the Congress is controlled by Bolsonaro allies. So I can't even imagine how things are going to get next year during the election. It's going to be very difficult.
In what way? What do you foresee might happen?
Well, first of all, Bolsonaro has his own stop the steal thing, right? I mean, he's just doing exactly the same thing as former President Trump did, preemptively disputing election results and saying, fraudulent voting machines in Brazil. So he's mobilizing his base using this. After the September 7th protests in Brasilia, he sort of took that back a little bit because he felt that he would be really, there's a big discussion. Why did he tone down his rhetoric, right? I mean, he's no longer saying he's not going to accept results. At one point, he was saying, if I don't win, I'm not going to accept the results. And I'm not going to leave the Planalto Palace unless I'm arrested or I'm dead. He actually said that, right? And if you follow all the Telegram and WhatsApp groups, Bolsonarista groups, they were all saying, elections are going to be fraudulent. If he doesn't win, that means we're not going to accept the results. So it's like a slow motion coup d'etat. But after September 7th, our Independence Day, when he was very aggressive towards Supreme Court ministers, judges, there were some sort of political intervention and he toned down the rhetoric. Mm-hmm. But I am positive he's going to do this if he realizes that, his polling numbers are not going anywhere, if he's still not polling well as today he has 20% popularity, support, approval rate. So, and discrediting and attacking the media, scientists, academia, it's just part of the strategy. You need this.
So, it's hard to predict what will happen. The elections are 10 months off. If the polling shows Lula ahead, Bolsonaro, as you mentioned, behind, and the other candidates of the so-called third way doing poorly, although Sergio Moro has a certain peak in the polls at this moment, as he's just announced he's going to be a presidential candidate. What's your sense of how things are going to go this next year?
I'm not very good with crystal balls, or I'm not a political scientist. You guys are.
What's your gut? What's your gut tell you as an experienced journalist who really feels the pulse of the nation?
My gut tells me to be cautious. If you think about it, in 2018, I think, if I'm not mistaken, elections were in October. In March that year, Bolsonaro was not, polling well. He was not seen as, a strong candidate. He does have a list of 68 million voters who benefited from Auxílio Emergencial, which was the emergency income transfer program during the pandemic. And he just managed to approve in Congress a mechanism that it's going to allow him to spend a lot of money. So I'm not sure what's going to be the effect of this, income transfer program that he's cash transfer. He's going to do this again starting this month. I'm not sure how that's going to, what kind of effect it's going to have among low-income voters. Because at the same time, we have very high inflation, income is going down, we're not growing. But I don't know. It's too many. I would not say that Bolsonaro is, how do you say, down and out?
Yeah, down and out.
I mean, it's, even though Lula is leading in the polls, Bolsonaro is the incumbent.
Do you think that Moro has a chance of surpassing Bolsonaro in this regard and being the person in the runoff against Lula? What kind of appeal do you think Moro might have that might allow him to like beat out Bolsonaro?
I think Moro has an appeal to the conservative voters who are disappointed in Bolsonaro because his economic agenda, the liberal reforms, went nowhere. And so you have this part of the population who does not like Lula and PT because has, bad memories from the corruption scandals, but at the same time is disappointed in everything that happened during the Bolsonaro administration. The economy is horrible, corruption scandals. But how big is this, right? I mean, we saw this protests recently, pro-impeachment protests. You had the left protests, right, that were big. Then you had the pro-Bolsonaro protests that were also big. And then you had tiny protests of people who are, conservative or center-right. So I'm not sure what's the size of this, part of the population. I don't see a lot of people.
It's going to be a very interesting 2022. There's no doubt about that. So I'm curious. You were a foreign correspondent covering the 2016 presidential elections between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump.
Yes, and 2008 and 2012.
So what are your impressions of Donald Trump? What were your impressions of Donald Trump at the time? And how is he viewed among Brazilian journalists in general?
Well, I think we made the same mistake as American journalists, that we thought he was, a clown. And he was just, this colorful character and actually did not take him that seriously, which is pretty much the same that we did with Bolsonaro, most of the journalists. But I remember it's just the first pro-Trump rally I covered, I think it was in Florida. And the way that the people, his supporters, were like throwing paper cups against the journalists and yelling fake news. And I'm thinking, God, what is this? Like, I had never seen anything like that. And I thought, this is very bizarre, this hostility, like these people that actually think that journalists, they're just outright liars. And that's exactly what happened in Brazil. It's just... Do
you think Bolsonaro consciously copies Trump and studies him and then uses him as a model? Or is it just there's a synchronization in their approaches and their ideologies and their comportment, their mannerisms?
I'm positive he copies Trump. Well, first you have contact. For instance, Steve Bannon is close to the Bolsonaro family. They talk. I don't believe in conspiracy theories that the guy, is somehow was directly involved, blah, blah, blah. But of course they talk a lot, like they talk strategy, right? And then there's things, I remember when Trump canceled the White House subscriptions for the New York Times, a week later, Bolsonaro cancels the Folha subscriptions. And we felt actually flattered, right? Okay, so New York Times, Folha, that doesn't look that bad. I mean, everything was just right after whatever Trump did, he did. Like all the initiatives that Alliance for Freedom of Religion, which is basically, pro-white Western Christians, same thing. Like they just repeat. It's just the same playbook.
Before we return to the interview with Patrícia, I want to take a minute to ask those of you who can a favor. We are an independent podcast and we rely on the audience greatly to finance this program. I can't produce things by myself, so please, if you can, help support the workers who make this program possible at patreon.com/Brazil Unfiltered. Even $5 a month would go a long way and would help us to continue to come out with new material on a regular basis. If you're not in a position to donate, that's totally okay. Enjoy the program. Let's return to the interview. But do you think that Bannon, you interviewed Bannon, if I'm not mistaken, he has a very strong relationship with Eduardo Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro's third son and the São Paulo congressman. But do you think he has an ongoing influence, Bannon, on will he be influential in 2022?
I'm not sure if he's influential. I know they talk to him, they meet with him. Last time, I'm not sure if it was which of the Bolsonaro, I think it was Eduardo. Last time he was here, if I'm not mistaken, he met again. They talk a lot. So, I mean, I'm not sure if it's like, if he's an influence or if they all share the same worldview, right? And they sort of, they feed from each other's ideas, but it's basically they believe in the same stuff. I do think, for instance, one of the things that there's this social media getter that belongs to Jason Miller, who was former President Trump's, was one of his, he worked with him. So you have like all the Bolsonarista and Bolsonaro himself migrating to this, like a right-wing pro-freedom of speech Twitter. And this is backed and financed by that Chinese businessman who finances Steve Bannon.
Right.
And Bannon. So, I mean, there's lots of commonalities there.
So listen, on numerous occasions, you work for Folha de São Paulo, and I subscribe to Folha de São Paulo to follow what's going on in Brazil and know your work very well in that regard. But at times it seems that the mainstream papers in Brazil, Estado de São Paulo, Estadão, Folha, Globo, really push not only an editorial position supporting the third way, but really promoting kind of a notion that trying to create a candidate, much as Globo created College of Mello in 1989 against Lula. And at this moment, it seems, unless I'm reading things wrongly, that they see Sergio Moro as that candidate. Do you think the mainstream media has that much influence on that outcome and can really affect that in some way?
I'm not sure I have enough knowledge. I mean, I'm a reporter. I don't do opinion. And I really try not to do a lot of that because I think these lines are blurred nowadays, like reporting and opinion writing. Of course, the editorial, like the opinion parts and the owners of the media outlets, they have their opinions. I don't see all the newspapers or Folha trying to make or to build a candidacy of Moro. Folha, at least I know they have this obsession of, trying to be plural. So they are always going to be critical. I'm going to give you an example. When I was covering the protests against and pro former President Dilma's impeachment, when I went to the pro-impeachment protests, all these people with the green and with the Brazil T-shirts, and people would say, when I introduced myself, oh, Foice de São Paulo, data Foice. I'm not sure how to translate this.
The Hammer and Sickle newspaper, basically, kind of a reference to the communist Soviet Union symbolism.
Exactly. And then when I went to cover the other, like the more PT or left-wing protests, people would say, oh, you are Partido da Mídia Golpista.
The party that's supporting the movement, the impeachment against Dilma Rousseff.
Basically that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think in terms of Folha, that's what I can tell more. I mean, they have investigated. You had stories about Mensalão that was against President Lula. You had stories about some of his corruption accusations. And then you had all the stories against Bolsonaro. I do understand that the media in general was a bit not critical while covering Lava Jato. And I think that's something that I did not cover Lava Jato, but I feel part of this, maybe many media outlets made the mistake of just covering it without questioning much. I don't think they would embark in any new candidacy building or in a coverage, in such an acritical way.
Did Folha endorse Bolsonaro at the end of the day? I can't remember.
No.
They didn't call on people to vote for any of the candidates in the second round?
No. I don't think so.
See what happens in 2022. So, as you know, Facebook has now created a new company called Meta, which includes Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and other media platforms. And they seem to have had a significant amount of influence in the United States, including trying to shape public policy. Do you think Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of this new conglomeration, does he have influence in Brazil with Facebook, which is extremely big and powerful in Brazil? What's going on there on that? Do you know anything about that?
Well, they are all the platforms, and of course, Meta, Facebook is one of the strongest ones. They have lobbyists in Congress, and they are actively trying to influence legislation. Right now, Brazil is they're negotiating legislation that's basically going to regulate social media. The same kind of discussion you have here in the US about changing Section 230 of the Decency in Communications Act, I think from 1996. We have our legislation that they're also trying to make social media platforms more responsible for what they're doing, right? And of course, maybe not as many as here in the US, but there's like lots of lobbyists trying to, influence legislation. That I know for sure, because, it's well known, and they're putting pressure on legislators to not get like a heavy regulation, or, they're trying to mold the legislation.
So, but the Workers' Party in the past has talked about regulating the media in some way, arguing that there's a certain monopoly of a certain outlets that have pretty much of a domination of the market. What's your take on all that? How are journalists seeing these proposals, and what needs to be done to fix the problems in Brazil related to the media?
I think the discussion about oligopolies. Do you say that in English?
Yeah, oligopolies. Yeah,
oligopolies in the media, mass media. We have a new scenario now. At one point, you had mainstream media, few families controlling the main media outlets, and media had this gatekeeper role, right? Like you would decide what is news and what is not, and what people are going to read or not or watch. With the internet and internet platforms, they are so much stronger than traditional media in dominating the public debate that, of course, there's a need to regulate, and this is not only in Brazil, everywhere. Here in the US, you're discussing this too. And in Brazil, there is a huge need to regulate. But you have to consider this new scenario, which is, you asked me this before. How strong is traditional media at this point in terms of molding the public opinion? So you do have to consider, in terms of market dominance, that there's a new scenario, right? And I don't think I think pretty much everybody agrees about concentration. There's a need to regulate market concentration, right? And dominance. But there's not a need to regulate content. I think there it gets complicated and risky, So as long as people are discussing market dominance, I think it is important and very necessary.
Patrícia, I actually agree with you on that. You've really received a great success as a journalist, and your work is very important in Brazil. It's a very male-dominated profession still. Can you talk about your experiences as a woman journalist?
Yeah, it's It's difficult. I mean, in terms of, you can say there's still very few women in positions of leadership in newspapers or TVs everywhere. And in that sense, fewer Black journalists in positions of leadership as well. So for the women, I think we experience misogyny from sources, from government officials. I mean, it's just, it's Brazil and India. I think they're like one of the worst countries in terms of being a woman journalist, because the kind of attacks and abuse we get, it's just like unbelievable. Like rape threats are routine. And in the newsrooms, I think newsrooms are trying to adapt to a new reality where people are much more aware of inequality, like gender inequality. And so I think there's an effort to make this better. We're not there yet. We're far from being there. The culture that we used to have in many places, you know, that harassment was pretty much tolerated, is no longer there. People were fighting this, but this is ingrained, you know. It's
I might have a stereotype of the journalists going out for a drink, making all the comments about women and who they want to sleep with. And that was the culture of the bohemian intellectual middle class journalist groups that I knew in Brazil when I lived there in the 70s and 80s. I know that's changed. Is a younger generation making a difference in that? People coming into the profession that have a very different outlook, or is it a top-down thing?
Absolutely. The younger generations, I mean, young journalists, young female journalists, they just don't tolerate this at all. And this is so good, you know, that they just sort of energized us, you know, to say, like, girls, this is not acceptable at all, right? So it's really, it's not a top-down thing. It's a thing that, you know, the young journalists, they showed the male bosses and journalists, like older journalists such as myself, that, you know, this is not acceptable. So there's a lot of reaction today to that culture you described, which is pretty much, it was dominant.
I'm also curious, is there kind of a unification or a unity among journalists vis-a-vis the current government, that people see themselves as even though they're presenting objective news reporting, that there's a general sense of entrenchment against a government that's very conservative and going against many of the values that most journalists would hold dear?
I think there's more cooperation. Like usually you would have much more competition, but there's cooperation in trying to get original and accurate information. I'll give you an example. When Bolsonaro government tried to manipulate statistics, COVID-19 statistics, and they were trying to do like a propaganda, huge campaign to convince Brazilians that, Brazil was managing so well the pandemic response. So because we could no longer trust the figures that were being published by the government, like all the newspapers and TVs, they got together to get from the original sources, from the state governments. So in that sense, when we are all facing this difficulty to access accurate information, because this is one of the least transparent it's the least transparent administration since the end of the military dictatorship. We also have our Freedom of Information Act, but they are just denying all the requests and they are trying to manipulate statistics, blah, blah. So in that sense, yes, journalists are more united and less, in a competitive mood. But I think we're still competing for scoops among each other. But one thing that there is solidarity is when there's attacks, because the attacks have been so absolutely outrageous that you see, especially among women, this is something that is really, wonderful.
And finally, what's been your experience as an international journalist? What have been the challenges? What have been the wonderful things about being a journalist working abroad?
It depends on where we're reporting, I mean, I did a lot of conflict reporting, Syria, Libya, those places where you have, the challenges of being in a difficult, hostile scenario. But at the same time, you're just there in a very privileged position because we have a home with a warm bed and we're going to go back there, and people are there really with no options. Whereas nowadays at home, this is what's so bizarre. Like, I had never felt threatened working in Brazil, my home country, democracy. And so now that we're targeted, it's very different. In terms of being a correspondent in the US, it's nice because it's a humbling experience, because here you're like, oh, whatever, you're like a Brazilian journalist from some random newspaper. Why should I talk to you? So it is good. It builds character,
Have you noticed a change in people's attentions towards Brazil since Bolsonaro was elected?
Yeah, negative change. Like, they look at me or at anyone and says, oh my God, I feel so sorry.
My impression from the work I've done is that people were more attentive to what's going on in Brazil. At least they knew a little bit about the country more than normally. I don't know if that's been your experience.
Yes, definitely. Yes. People are following, especially because of the environment, because it's a global thing and everybody is threatened by what's happening in Brazil in terms of environmental policies. So yes, I agree totally with you. People are paying more attention. I mean, it's unfortunate that they're paying more attention for bad news, but...
Yeah, it's interesting because in teaching Brazilian history and culture in the United States, there was a boom when Lula was elected and people got really excited and interested, and you could see an interest in student enrollment in classes. And then as things started getting bad in 2014 and beyond, there was a drop in interest. And now I'm seeing a resurgence of interest again in the country, its culture, its history, its people. So
really?
I hope that's positive, and I hope we have positive things to offer people about what's going on in Brazil next year. Patrícia, thank you so much for joining us on Brazil Unfiltered. It was a wonderful time to talk to you. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person and sharing wonderful times together. We must go out for a drink.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was wonderful, an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. Take care. Ciao, ciao. I hope that you're enjoying the program. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. Also, tell your friends, colleagues, students, professors, and anyone else you think might be interested in the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.